leukocytes. There's a couple different kinds, so we'll do a couple different videos, but let's go ahead and do this 10-minute one. So, what we want to talk about is we want to explain the function of the leukocytes, or the like lucid is where this comes from. So that's the whitened cells, right? So when we first looked at these in the microscope, we saw they were kind of like you could see through them, which was different from the red blood cells or the erythrocytes. They were obviously very red. And it turns out there's types of them. So we're going to look at their appearance, and that's going to help us kind of differentiate between them. And there's going to be different numbers of each, like relative to each other. We'll talk about how they are formed, and then what they go through with their life. Some of them actually, kind of get educated in different parts of the body, right? It's kind of neat. And then we'll talk about some of the deficiencies briefly in one of the last videos. Okay. So, leukocytes, or the white blood cells, are the fewest. It's only 1% of the hematocrit, right? And so we've only got about 5,000 to 10,000 of these white blood cells per microliter. And what do? It's mainly about invasion. So they protect against infectious organisms. We're finding out they play roles in cancer prevention in the body, like an innate cancer prevention, which is very exciting stuff. They Most of them only spend a couple hours in the bloodstream, and then they migrate to the connective tissues, where they start kind of monitoring the tissues and checking for things like rogue cells or invaders or just damaged tissue. They have a big, conspicuous, and sometimes weirdly shaped nucleus, right? Like some of the nuclei we're going to look at are going to be like the craziest looking nuclei you've ever seen. They look not healthy, but that is what they look like. That is healthy. They retain their organelles because they make a lot of protein for the most part, definitely compared to the red blood cells who don't make any protein after they eject their nucleus. We'll talk about things called the granules in the cytoplasm, and how they can tell us which white blood cells we're looking at, and like what they do in there, right? There's chemicals in those granules, those little tiny specks. And some of those chemicals include things like enzymes, which are protein machines, right? Others are going to be employed in different ways to defend against potentially pathogens or rogue cells. Here's the structure of like a generalized leukocyte. Like this is like a generalized, because there are many different kinds. Let me see if I can see, like they're different. They actually look very different, right? So that's like why I wanted to just bring that up. But they have stuff that you should know about, all of them. So the first thing they have is they have like nucleus, and sometimes they have some crazy looking nuclei. Um, and then they also have oftentimes these little like inclusions, right? Sometimes we call them granules. We're going to have loaded with mitochondria because we need a lot of metabolism to help all those ribosomes make tons of new proteins, right? So lots of proteins. And then we have a lot of the larger ones, especially like macrophage group, will have pseudopods, right? Like false pseudo, like kind of arms, feet, really, pod, right? So they're little feet, and sometimes they can use them to reach out and grab, like, maybe an invader cell or a piece of rogue cell, and pull it in, and then use those lysosomes, like to lyse, to break apart open. They will digest them using the lysosomes. So we'll look at that. So some of the key ones to look at are the granulocytes, and the granulocytes have those little granules, right? Those little pucks all over them. Okay, and those are little inclusions that have, we talked about, like some of the cell signaling molecules, sometimes they have enzymes in there. And so of the kinds you'll see neutrophils, eosinophils, and basophils. So neutrophils are really abundant, like 60 to 70% of them. And so they don't have as many visible granulocytes, and they have this crazy nucleus that's lobed a few times, right? So here it is. Here's the nucleus. Here's like one lobe of the nucleus. It's kind of connected here. You can barely see it. Two lobes, and then like sort of a miniature fourth, and then like here's a fifth, right? And then they have a few little granules, but like definitely nowhere near as many as the eosinophils and the basophils, right? Those are like so loaded, they're pink. Okay, neutrophil. Okay, let's talk about the eosinophil. Let's change color too. Let's change it to pink, and here's why. Eosin is like a pinkish dye, right? And so when they first started like dyeing these cells so they could see them under a microscope, because normally they aren't pink, right? You have to put biological dyes into them. And so they're large and rosy, and they have a bilobed nucleus. Bi meaning two, okay? So when we look at an eosinophil, we see here's one side of the nucleus and then the other side. So the two lobes are there, check. And then like tons and tons of these little inclusions or granules, super pink, and they really pick up that eosin stain, right? That eosin is pink. Okay, and then let's do basophils. Let's do red because that's fun. Super like rare, rare. They have some of these violet granules, which is interesting, and then they have an S-shaped like nucleus, so it's not a bilobed nucleus, but it's an S-shaped, and so you can't even really see it in here, but see they have these like larger purple, I'm kind of filling them in with my pen, like violet ones. And if you're not really seeing in nucleus in this case, like there, that is why, right? So that is the basophil. Okay. So then you have what we call the agranulocytes, meaning A means they don't have granules, right? So no granules, right? So like when you look at these, you don't see them dotted like crazy. There's just not the case. But you do see something important. So no granules, but also we have that strangely shaped nucleus for this one, the monocyte. And a lymphocyte's characteristic of having this like ginormo, super dark nucleus. So I'm going to change my pen color back because I really like my pen color green. It's a happy color. Lymphocytes are kind of abundant. So lymphocytes are going to be the ones we use for like vaccines, right? So they're the ones that help us make all those antibodies for the most part. So they're going to be the ones with the giant, with is so big and so dark. This it looks bluish, right? And then like a super huge, like uniform dark brown, like violet. So here you go. This is it. And it's just a big, busy nucleus, huge nuke, right? Huge nucleus. Okay, that's the lymphocytes. Remember, that's the one for vaccines and antibodies as well. Okay, and then we have the monocytes. So there's like fewer of these. Now they're big. Now they are big, and they're going to have that kidney-shaped, horseshoe-shaped nucleus. So it's not lobed. Like if you remember, we were looking at some of the other granulocytes, and they had like, they would kind of section off the nucleus a bit, right? And this one doesn't have it. It's a very like kind of regular shape to it, right? So it's a lobed nucleus. Okay. And again, no granules, no granules. So variations in white blood cell number can happen different ways. So neutrophil, like, because they're doing different jobs mainly, and it has to do with like if there's a disease condition that's happening that's pretty specific, you can look at the abundance or like the number of different types of white blood cells and tell maybe what the body is battling, which is helpful. So when you're seeing like a rise in the amount of neutrophils, really like bacteria should be one of the first guesses you have. So they phagocytose or they eat bacteria. They also, in those granules, have antimicrobials, right, in them. Basophils are kind of specific for a few other types. So one is diabetes, also the chicken pox, different types of like sinusitis type inflammation of the sinuses. Itis is inflammation of, and then like the sinuses, sinus, right? And so when they inflame, when you have that inflammation, it's because you have vasodilators. Vaso is blood vessels, dilators means they get bigger, right? And that means they can dump more blood into that area. And the idea is if they can do that, then more repair mechanisms can make it there. And they do that with histamine. So if you've ever taken antihistamine because you had an allergy, because you had inflamed tissues and your nose was swollen, your eyes were swollen, in some cases, you're beginning anaphylaxis and you have swollen tissues in your throat, right? You would take an antihistamine such as Benadryl, and it calms that vasodilation effect, right? Also, they secrete heparin, which is an anticoagulant, which stops blood from, basically stopping and coagulating, and it increases the mobility and reduces the viscosity of blood in that area, but also it increases the ability of white blood cells just to move and migrate through the tissue. So histamine, heparin, and that is what is in the granules of those basophils. Some of the things. Eosinophils are kind of different. They're cyclical, so depending on, if it's daytime, if it's nighttime, it turns out sometimes it has to do with menses. Um, we're finding that they have a lot to do with things like allergies and asthma, and it might be because of their role in reducing parasitic infections. So, like humans, where were they? Humans typically have had a lot of where are my base? There it is. Have had lots of different infections over time from parasites, and they're thinking basophils also have some of they're in there with eosinophils with this one. And so we've always had a lot of parasites. And when we talk about parasitic infections, I'm talking worms, people. I'm talking worms. And so tapeworms, intestinal worms, um, are typically in our water sources and our food sources. And so now that we're becoming first worlders, the idea is we don't have like worms anymore, or rarely have worms, hopefully rarely or none. And so, since we have a native abundance of eosinophils that we're born with, they start kind of attacking our own body cells because we have naturally got an elevated amount because over evolutionary time we've been expecting that invasion of worms to kind of kick in, right? So we'd have some enough eosinophils on deck. And so like that was kind of the idea for that. Um, it's interesting. It's an evolving theory. Which is kind of cool. So what they do is they phagocytose antigens, antibody complexes. They release inflammatory chemicals. And what's neat is in their granules, they actually have enzymes that are specific to worms. See what I'm saying? Right. So, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you are wearing shoes because like worms come through the dirt and even asphalt, and they are sitting on everywhere. And they used to say when I was a kid, you know, um, dirt's like natural and dirt don't hurt. That's a lie. Dirt has so many eggs in it. It is ridiculous. So if your kid is eating dirt, like my kid at the playground today, I just like turned around. I was like, "Why do you have dirt in your mouth, child?" Now we're watching for worms. Or you're walking around and it's getting like they're hooking in, the hookworms are coming in through like the soles of your feet, super tiny, microscopic. Like it's not good. Eosinophils, yeah, so that's a thing. Interesting stuff. Too much information about my kids at the playground, huh? Well, they all do it. Don't let them. It's a bad idea. Nature wants to eat you. Or decompose you. So lymphocytes are, remember we talked about these are the vaccines are going to work with these ones. So they're increasing the number in diverse infections and immune response. They are learning cells. They are so smart. They are smart. Let's make it an M. Smart. Okay, they're very smart. They go and they become educated about what you are becoming exposed to. And some of that includes like cancer. We're finding they suppress cancer, virus infections. They present antigens to other cells, other immune cells, and teach them what to look for, like to look for those bad guys, right? Like, oh my goodness, that's what they look like. I know what the protein looks like now. They also can release certain signal chemicals, cytochemicals that can coordinate the actions of other immune cells and say, chemotaxis towards or positive chemotaxis or positive or negative chemotaxis away, move away from this area, right? They secrete antibodies and they have an immune memory. It may not be forever, but some are impressively long, like decades. Um, okay, so I am going to pause here and I'm going to pick up on monocytes in the next video. And so I hope that was helpful. And let's learn about white blood cells in video 12. Okay, hope you're having a great day.